I want to play devil's advocate for a second and talk about the secretary and her efforts to, I think, at least dilute the initial version of the resolution against the defamation of religions. And I think if you listen to the parts of her speech that were made public on the State Department website dated December 14th, it's interesting to note that I think the biggest difference from her perspective and her work today with, I think, the panelists here, and include myself in this, is that there is just a difference between pessimism and optimism of what you can do and how much you can work with one paradigm of values that is what, to say over broadly, Western culture or classical liberal principles, and a culture that has evolved over time in a very different way, where religion has been the primary identity marker of men, women, and children of various different ethnicities and nationalities today, but where those nationalities have not evolved with civil society and democratic institutions, but rather have moved from some type of monarchy or authoritarian government to another. And today, with the Arab Spring, you see a live fight now, especially as Zuhdi mentioned Syria. There is a question of whether this population can move from a subject mentality to a mentality towards citizenship, which requires a very significant change from being a passive player in your own life to a very active player in your own life, and understanding what your own role and responsibilities are, not only to your family, but the society you live in. So with regard to religion, and I'll say it myself, coming from a Pakistani family, that from a Shiite background, which is a minority group in Pakistan, and then growing up here in the United States, I don't think I even understood what the degree of problems religion in the public sphere can raise, whether it's Islam or, if we talk about Catholicism in a different century or whatever, but the fact that that's what is a live issue there in Muslim majority countries today versus the U.S. here now, and the way we have evolved the concept of separation of church and state under the Constitution, and this American citizenship, which allows an even playing field with people from different backgrounds to come together here and find a personal space for themselves to be as orthodox as they want to be, as liberal as they want to be, a cultural Muslim, whatever. There's 1,000 ways to describe ourselves, but we find a way to do it here, and we find a way to tolerate each other. Tolerate itself does not mean like. I don't have to like anybody. But there is some degree of respect, I think, that is inculcated in secular democracies that is a paradigm shift that is going to take generations when you talk about Muslim majority countries. So what do we do in the meantime? So with regard to the OIC, I will say, in their defense, what I liked about it was this idea of, okay, these countries are finally getting together. Some of them are very wealthy and have a lot of wonderful resources. Maybe they're in a position to help other countries grow civil society. Maybe there will be more schools. Maybe there will be more high schools. I don't know. But unfortunately, what I'm seeing instead is, as the OIC has built its institutions in the last decade, it has not been, or does not appear to be so far, one of its primary goals of development within the Muslim majority country, but rather it has been an opportunity to focus on us versus the other, and what the other, meaning Western countries, the US primarily, the issues with regard to Israel, and how we can deal with this great other as a bloc in international arenas like the UN. Blasphemy is a concept that, for very specific reasons, religious individuals in Western society decided needed to no longer have the force it once did, because it did not actually realize the theoretical benefits of blasphemy laws, but instead became a pretextual tool for people to use against each other on a day-to-day basis, for power plays with politics, for fights with neighbors about where the fence should be. And this is the problem with blasphemy laws. When we introduce it in arenas like the UN, and I understand, especially in an environment post 9/11, where there are fears about how maybe even myself can look at my cousins who wear a hijab, or my mother that plays five, how will these people be treated because those guys did that? But my mom lives in Southern California, and she has nothing to do with this, and I don't want people to be mean to her. Well, fine, that's a valid fear. But there is a difference between fearing something and actually looking at the facts and the statistics about what actual hate crimes are happening. What is the violence that is happening between different communities and why? We in the United States actually already have laws that protect people. There's tort laws, there are criminal laws. There is a difference under U.S. jurisprudence between freedom of thought and freedom of action. That is why for us there is a very big difference when we talk about the First Amendment and we talk about what is incitement. The incitement to hatred versus the incitement to violence is the action. Andrea and I don't have to like each other. She could really hate me. But if I smack her or she smacks me, now we have a legal issue, potentially. I would never do that. But the thing is, the thought police, the ideas of thought control, this is the issue that we're having. A lot of Islamist organizations use statistics to talk about what the average American thinks of Muslims and Islam. But none of those statistics are laid next to statistics about what Americans think about Christianity or anything else. I don't know how many Americans like atheists. I don't think an atheist is ever going to be president. But are there atheist organizations having their equivalent phrase of Islamophobia used in the public sphere to discuss how they are being offended for their views about the world and society that they live in? So what I want to talk about, less the OIC because I think it's been covered, is more a strategic issue of what is the right way to talk about these issues and what is the wrong way, because I think as the Istanbul process moves forward with its first meeting, in Turkey and then the DC, this coming summer, the next one is going to be in the EU. I think people have to make this an issue of human rights and an issue that involves everyone, not Muslim versus non-Muslim. These are issues of what we consider to be universal principles of human rights, which defend individual conscience, not the great we, which is a more common understanding in Eastern cultures, not necessarily only Muslim. And this is why, as some of the panelists mentioned, documents like the Cairo Declaration are very critical to understand because they will directly relate to how UN resolutions are implemented in practice. I believe there is a portion of the Cairo Declaration or in its notes that there were individuals that specifically stated that human rights will be used as a pretext by Westerners to influence Muslim nations. So now if this is again an issue of post-colonialism, that we have been treated a certain way by others and we are not in a position to become independent, that is a complex that is much more complicated to discuss today, but from the perspective of people who are living in Pakistan or Syria or Egypt or whatever, we cannot encourage the use of Islamophobia or this resolution to be a further excuse to prevent human rights principles from being realized in these countries, because it's only until these human rights principles, whether we're talking about freedom of expression, or I'll use a practical example, the NGOs in Cairo, whose offices were ransacked in December. Some of these NGO workers had to go to the U.S. Embassy for protection, and now there's a trial of more than 40 of these NGO workers are going to go on trial. Are they Islamophobes for wanting to give the average Egyptian a concept of secular democracy against an Islamist worldview that they could really think about and choose when they go to the election polls whenever they go later this year? I don't think that's fair, and I don't think anyone would call them Islamophobes. But for us to sit here today and say we simply want to talk about those same secular principles that allow all of us in this room to call ourselves American, to have Egyptians to have that opportunity to look at the world in the same way and protect the Coptic Christian or the Shia Muslim in Pakistan, there's equivalency here that needs to be discussed. I'll stop here with just one last comment. The Lawfare project that I work on focuses on litigation, the subversive use of litigation, as Anne knows very well. But what I want people to understand is the resolution at the UN's final success was based not on the law itself, but was preceded by years of debate in the policy world, PR, journalism, conversations about culture and how we relate to each other. Those that are concerned about what the OIC is doing need to understand that they need to articulate why they are concerned, because it's not just about the OIC. It's about how people treat each other. It's about advocating democracy. And if you can't talk about freedom of expression or human rights or women's rights or minority rights from a legal understanding, you don't have to go to law school, but just the There's no reason to attack religions or attack why someone is what. It's none of our business. But let's talk about how we treat each other in the public sphere, because that's where the fair conversation is.